Hello chess neurites. A warm welcome to our weekly session at Chess Neurons. I hope you have all been gaining valuable knowledge from our puzzles. Today we are diving deep into the crucial topic of Outpost. Let me discuss a bit about the concept of Outpost and how it can be helpful for us. So when we discuss about the outpost, so a specific square can be made an outpost square, but there are certain conditions that must be met for that square to be an outpost square. So what are those conditions? So the square should be defended by our pawn. Okay, it's good. So for example, we can say so many squares meet these conditions, right? So these squares are defended by our pawns. But that's just one part of it. What's the second part? The second part of it is that square should not be attacked by opponent's pawn. So it should not be possible for the opponent's pawn to attack that square or control the square. Now, if we talk about this square, then technically it would not be, because first condition is met but not the second condition, because it can be attacked. Not even this one, because g4, not even this one, because here. Now, not even a6, because this is here. Then if we look at, so now this pawn is controlling these both and this pawn is controlling this, as we have already seen. f3 is coming, so this is covered. But how about this? And how about this? So these squares meet the definition of the outpost square. That is a square that is defended by our pawn and cannot be attacked by opponent's pawn. So same is the case here. So all right, we understood that, but how is it important for us? So what happens is that square, so basically an outpost square is a weak square that we can take advantage of. So let's say c4 and b3 are potential, so are the weak squares in opponent's position. So why specifically those weak squares? What special we can do about it? So what will happen is, whenever we try to bring a piece on the opponent side, we want to increase the pressure. Sometimes what happens is that opponents make use of the pawn to bring that piece back, to attack that piece, so the piece would have to come back. So opponent's pawns can be used in bringing our pieces back. So whenever such an outpost square is there, and if we bring our pieces there, then it will become difficult for the opponent to remove that piece, because as we know that if an outpost square is there, then there would be no pawns of the opponent being able to put pressure. So that's the importance of it. Now the second part is that if there is an outpost square, then ideally you want to put the knight there. So now why knight? What crimes have other pieces committed that mostly the knight should be preferable and not the other pieces? So let's try to understand. So what happens is that knight is a short range piece. Now look at this bishop, the activity it has. Look at this rook. I mean, right now it's blocked, but potentially, in an open file, it can go from the 8th rank to the first rank or second rank in just one move. And of course, the mighty queen. So, but when we get to the knight, right, it's not as flexible. So for example, this one can put pressure on the king side or queen side. This piece can shift to not only put pressure, shift very quickly. So it's case with the bishop, with the queen, but not with the knight. It takes time for the knight to shift and to put pressure. So that's why it is a short range piece. So what happens is that if we put the knight on the outpost square, then it will become difficult for the opponent to remove that, and that's good for us, because we don't want to keep on moving that knight. It's not in many cases as flexible as the other long range pieces, so it would be better. And if we find that stable square, that outpost square for the knight, then combining with that, we can put pressure on the opponent. So now let's so I explained everything about the outpost square, why in general knight is preferred, and those weak type of squares, how we can take advantage of it. So let's get started with the position. So this is black to play here. And we have already noticed that there are these two outpost squares. Center is stable, by the way, but white's king on d1 is, of course, even if center is stable, the position is a close. Still, position is a bit on the close side. Still, king on d1 is never a comfortable thing. There is this open file. Our rook is already there, so we should try to increase the pressure. Now, once we recognize that these two outpost squares are there, and then we recognize that we know that if there is outpost square, we should ask ourselves, can I bring my knight there? And then we have a move. We can play knight a5 in this position. So taking advantage of the fact that opponent cannot capture this because there is queen takes b1. Now, some of you would be saying, wait a minute, what is going on, Ankit? You had actually in some positions told us, or in the weak king positions, or some of the video about weak king, you had said that if the king is weak, then you should try to open the position. You should go for the pawn break. So why not f6? So, and I noticed that some of you also attempted playing that move, but we have to be careful about opponent's ideas. Yes, f6 is interesting, but we don't want to give up a pawn for that and help our opponent in improving their knight's position. So be careful about your opponent's ideas as well. So that's why maybe after actually bringing the knight to b3 or c4, now that pawn is defended, so we will go for f6. So it's not like there is only one thing that if it is only outpost, then we'll only do that and focus on that. No, of course, game is, so we can try to put pressure on both, but please, just because the king is weak, don't be in a rush and play f6, because I notice many of you just see certain thing and then you rush to do that. No, please look at the position carefully, look at your opponent's ideas. So here, it would not be that great to play f6. We should try to bring our knight to a5. Now, of course, we can either bring it to c4 or b3. So opponent can play queen d3, bringing the knight on the outpost square. This pawn is under pressure. Bishop a1. Now, on the queen side, so what might happen here is, see, if you might see the outpost square, but if you don't try to bring your knight, then some of you might also play knight a7 and then rook c4 or something. So rook can also go there, but still the pressure that the knight can put will be significant than the other pieces when it is on the outpost square. So please keep that in mind. Then, so as we are seeing, knight f5, queen d3, knight c4, bishop a1. Then what we can do? So it's time for f6. We have not forgotten about the pawn break, putting pressure on the king side, and of course we can do that because look at that king. Yeah. So this we can take it with the rook, and then just bishop d6, improving the bishop's position, putting pressure on this knight. Knight h3 because this pawn should be defended. Then queen b5, so improving the queen's position and slowly increasing the pressure on the queen side as well. And because of this knight on the outpost square, because of some pressure on the king side as well, and that weak king, this is clearly better position for black to be in. So please identify the outpost square, and if possible, try to get your knight there. Alright, so now let's look at another position. So this is white to play here. Now, sometimes what might happen is that outpost square might already be present in a position. So like we saw in the last example, those c4 and b3 squares were already present, but that would not be the case all the time. So, and we'll look at this example to understand that. So as I can see, so by the way, this is white to play, and as I can see, white is ahead in development because black has yet to develop the knight. So it's an opposite side. Castling middle game is also there, definitely. So how should we continue? So one thing that you should remember is that the closer the outpost square to the center, or if it is a central outpost square, the better for you. Because what happens is, if the knight, so the piece that we want to get on the outpost square is the knight. We already know that. So if it is closer to the center, then the knight would be much more effective, because that way it can put pressure on both flanks. So just imagine that if there was an outpost square on a5, just for understanding, see what it would be doing, putting pressure here, here, could go back, something like that. So everything is happening on the queen side and it's a bit limited. But imagine if the centralized knight, if this was the outpost square. Look at the pressure that the knight could generate on the queen side and the king side. So you should always try to look for creating such outpost squares. And since not only we are ahead in development, but if we look at opponent's pieces and our pieces, then it's clear that our pieces are also quite active. So then in this position, so if we have to create an outpost square, so we have to remember that we should try to target a square, and in this position what better than targeting the d5 central square. And also there is a logic, because opposite side castling middle game is there, we are going to put pressure on the king side, and this bishop is right now aiming at the king, but this pawn is there. So what we should try to do is we should try to play f5. What's the plan? If the opponent takes it or pushes, not only the bishop would get active, that's another thing, but what also happens is that there is an outpost square. So once this pawn will gone, then this will become an outpost square. So that's actually good for us. Now let's see. So there can be in this position, there is a move that is queen c8, just defending this, but still it doesn't solve all the problems for black, because there can be this capture, and then there are knight f5 type of ideas as well. So and the queen has also gotten passive and black's king side has gotten weaker. So these moves don't help. So let's say if opponent is like, alright, I'll play e5, no problem. We have created the central outpost square by doing what? So pawn was already covering this, but this pawn was here. So we made black push the pawn, and then now this is an outpost square. So bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, bringing that knight on the centralized outpost square with tempo. And then in this position, okay, alright, we worked so hard just to give up the knight in a move. Yeah, sometimes we have to do it, but that is for the bigger goal. That is the king. Opponent's king gets too weak. We can just bring the queen, and then rook d3 is coming, rook g3. So that's the thing. If the opponent, alright, plays e takes f5, no problem at all. We can play bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, knight d5 is coming with tempo, and this is just so once the queen moves, then this, and the king side is too weak. So that f5 move is the reason why white was able to get the centralized outpost square on d5 for the knight, and that was the main reason behind weakening of black's king side, and for white to get the dominating position.